Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. If you're just joining us, you'll notice that we're going to have all of your audio muted, but you're welcome to share your video with us if you'd like, so we can see whether or not you're engaged with the presentation and if there's anything that we can do to improve it and keep you engaged. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we encourage you to put those into the chat. We're not going to answer those throughout the presentation, but we will circle back around at the end to talk about anything that we've missed. And then keep your eyes open for polls throughout this presentation. We are going to send out a few poll questions where we'll ask you about where you're at in your business planning so that we can try to tailor our presentation a little bit more to meet your needs. So we're going to give people maybe another minute or two and make sure that we've got everybody that's going to attend in the presentation, and then we'll kick this thing off. I don't have any royalty-free music queued up, so we'll just have to sit in silence a little bit for now. Unless, Duke, you want to banter with me a little bit.
Sure, anything you want.
Oh, perfect. And then as you guys are joining, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We will be keeping a side eye on that. And we also have Lisa, who will be keeping an eye on that in the background. If anybody has technical issues or questions about this presentation or the organization, we'll make sure to answer those as quickly as we can.
And we will take a look at the chat box.
All right, it's about 1:03, so anybody else that comes in, they'll be able to have access to the recording, but we're going to go ahead and kick off this presentation. And like I said earlier, we'll get some housekeeping issues in a second here. All right. Oh,
Are we checking vaccination cards?
We are not checking vaccination cards.
Ah, okay.
All right, so it's a real quick, just a quick introduction. Thanks for joining us today for today's webinar of Start Smart with the Nevada Small Business Development Center. My name is Jake Carrico. I'm a business development advisor with the Nevada SBDC. And if you're unfamiliar with us, we're a nonprofit organization that's part of a nationwide network of small business development centers. We're funded partially by the Small Business Administration and then partially by local partners such as UNR, UNLV, and other local government and private institutions. Our mission is to promote and facilitate economic prosperity across Nevada, and we do so by providing two primary services. One, no-cost trainings like this webinar that you're in right now, and then two, no-cost business advising as well. A bit on myself, like I said, my name is Jake Carrico. I've worked for the Small Business Development Center for about 8 years now. I hold a Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration with a major in Economics and Finance, as well as an MBA. And I've worked for about 4 years in commercial real estate lending as well. And then also presenting with me today is Duke. Duke, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm Duke. I'm also with the Nevada SBDC. I'm a business advisor there for about 1.5 years. Prior, I've started more on the entrepreneur side. I've started 12 companies. CEO of 6, currently CEO of 2, board meeting, serve as the president of a board of 2 companies, and then several more. So the SBDC is a give back for me to help support small businesses, and I bring in the serial entrepreneur side to the business as well, and also an MBA.
So as you can see, we're lucky to have Duke today. So for all of your tough questions, aim them at Duke, and then I will just sit here in silence. All right, so a few more housekeeping items. We're going to keep audio muted throughout the presentation. This is just so that we can get through everything in a timely manner. But then if you do have questions, go ahead and put those into the chat. We're going to keep track of those, and we'll circle back around at the end of the presentation to talk through anything that we didn't already address. And then lastly, we are going to use the Zoom poll function. So look out for our poll questions. We should have about 2 or 3 throughout the presentation. where we'll ask you about where you're at in your business planning journey and try to tailor our presentation a little bit more to the needs of you all. So here's our agenda for today. So first off, we're going to talk about some common terms that Duke or myself might use that maybe you haven't heard before. Then we're going to get into business planning with the purpose. So the ways that you might business plan, the reasons that you might be creating a business plan for, helping you figure out what stage of business planning you're in and why it's important in the first place. And then after part 2, we're going to get into kind of the meat of this presentation, which is really feasibility business planning. So we're going to talk about what problem your business solves, and then get into your customers, competitors, and industry. And then finally, we're going to get into how you might finance your presentation, your business, sorry. There are a few things that we're going to leave out today. Some of the things that maybe are putting the cart before the horse. So we're not going to talk a ton about licensing. We might not talk about setting up a website. Really what we're focused on is figuring out if your idea is feasible and if you have a good market opportunity for your idea. Duke, anything to add to that before I jump into common terms?
I just might add one thing if I could. One of the things that all the advisors work with you on is addressing whether that business is not only survivable, sustainable, but is it a good choice for you? Because you only have one set of resources, and that's your opportunity cost. Whatever you decide to do may consume everything you have. So that means you're not going to be able to do something else. So we also weigh what is your best use of resources in the direction you may go. The other thing is the survivability issue. If you take an example, if we're the lifeguards at a beach with a beautiful island, Paradise Island, a half mile away, it's also our job to make sure that you're prepared, or if you're not ready, that you don't go off and start swimming. Because if you swim for a half a mile and you don't know how to swim yet, once you're getting to be exhausted and underwater, there's no time to start gathering information about how to swim. So we're going to try to be your lifeguard to make sure you're ready to go before you start, and then give you all the pre-planned resources so that it can help you get there where you want to go. Thank you.
Awesome. All right, so diving into those common terms, the first thing that I would probably say a lot, maybe too much, is business model. All that I mean when I say business model are the core aspects of running a business. A lot of times I'm thinking about what product or service you're selling, what customers you're trying to serve it to, and what are all the activities that support that. So that can consist of a lot of things, but it's kind of a catch-all term that I'll use. Customer segments are kind of synonymous with customer groups that have common characteristics. So it's just an easy way to group together people and refer to them as one customer segment. When I say roadmap, we're usually talking about a business plan roadmap or a business roadmap, which is a detailed plan with actionable steps that you need to accomplish a goal, that goal being to launch your business. When I say target customer, I'm usually talking about your ideal customer. Buyer persona is a little bit different, but kind of similar. We probably won't get into the nuance of that, but just know that when I say target customer or ideal customer, it's who is the perfect fit for your products or your services. And then the last thing, value proposition is kind of a catch-all term for the product or service that you're offering to people. So if you think about a fast food restaurant, yes, you're selling food and beverages to people, but another part of that value proposition might include the convenience of the drive-through, the ambiance or lack of the ambiance of the restaurant, the quality of customer service of the staff. So all of those features that impact a customer's experience can be part of your value proposition. So that's how you should think of it when we talk about it. And then Duke, do you want to clarify any of those terms or how you might use them, or add on anything else?
No, well done. Thank you. If you notice the business model picture up there, it has some X's and O's, and you're moving left and right. That picture does represent properly where you should be going and what you expect. You don't sit in an ivory tower and try to pre-plan or choreograph a soccer match from the whistle all the way to the end whistle. If you know going in that you're going to turn left, right, or even backwards sometimes, your life and journey will be a lot easier. but good coverage on that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Duke. All right. So one thing that I think Duke kind of touched on that we try to talk about before getting into business planning is entrepreneurship readiness. So sometimes people come to us having never owned a business before. And one of the things that we like to talk about is what are the reasons that you want to get into entrepreneurship or owning a business. So there are formal tools for this called entrepreneurship readiness assessments. And basically what they do is they just kind of break down the different reasons that you want to get into business, and then the skills and tool sets that you have access to make it happen. So for example, the 4 categories that you'll often see in a business ownership readiness assessment are: 1, general questions, just asking about what market opportunity you see, why do you want to get into this? Do you have your family's support? Is this a good time in your life to transition to business ownership? Another category of questions you'll see in this are asking you about your personal characteristics. So it'll ask you, are you a leader in general? Do you enjoy making decisions? Do you like competition? Are you a planner? Do you like people? Are you outgoing? So not all these characteristics do you necessarily need to have, but all else equal, having them helps you to be a more successful business owner. And then the third category of questions you'll see on these assessments are lifestyle questions. So it'll ask you about whether or not you're ready to withstand the transition from being a full-time employee to being a business owner, because maybe it will actually be a larger drain on your time. Maybe it'll be a little bit of a financial drain on your personal financials. And so it wants you to kind of reflect on your point in life that you're in and make sure that you're prepared to transition into something, because it's going to be a large undertaking and it might not be as easy as a full-time job for the first few years. And then lastly, these assessments are going to ask you about your skills. So they're going to ask you about what sort of educational and work background do you have, and do the skills that you have from that background match up with the skills that you're going to need to start this business. So if you wrap all this together, this is kind of what these entrepreneurship readiness assessments do, is kind of inventory everything in your life about your personal, your current personal lifestyle, your background, whether or not you're ready to transition. And so really it's just a kind of a come to Jesus moment for yourself to make sure that you're well positioned to make this jump into business ownership, because it's going to be very different from previous experiences that you've had if you've never been a business owner before. And being that we've got a CEO and a serial entrepreneur in the as a co-presenter here, it'd be great to hear what Duke thinks about these assessments, and maybe not necessarily doing a formal assessment, but thinking about getting into business ownership yourself. Duke, what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, thanks. Great coverage. One of the things to keep in mind is what level of commitment you may want to go into. People may have a hobby and a passion. It might become even a gig, side gig, and it may be a part-time job, or it might be a hands-off endeavor, or a full-time 24/7 job. In that sense, you don't have to do all the way in all the time. You can stop at even a side gig that gives you extra spending money or savings money. The other thing is really, really pay attention to whether you want to jump in. There's one category that automatically almost qualifies all the time, and that's if your answer is you want to get into business because you can't not do it. It's in your DNA, it's who you are. You're going to do it even if it kills you. Those people are set up. I'm one of them. Never thought twice, never looked over the shoulder, never had doubts. Other group is they think it's a nice, another along the spectrum is, hey, that might be fun, or I don't like having a boss. Those things you have to look at the rest of the entrepreneur readiness assessment to see if you're ready, because realistically owning your own business can really suck. And when it does, your alternative is based on your relative baseline, meaning if you could get a job exactly the way you wanted, say 20 hours a day with a perfect job, left by myself, working at home, how much could you earn doing that? And if you say, well, I can make $20,000 a year working half the time with my own boss for a company, and a company would be willing to pay me that. In that case, your threshold is $20,000. and anything you make in your company is above that or below that. So if your goal and your business model is to make $30,000, your marginal analysis is you're going to be willing to take all that risk for 10,000, not 30,000, if that makes sense. If you're a computer person and you can make 100,000 and you're trying to get to 150, you're risking your house, your family, your life, your choices, your options for 50,000. So you might as well get a second job as a security guard somewhere, if you can't afford that kind of risk. So just know that it can suck really bad, but if it's your suck, so it doesn't hurt as much. Thank you.
And on that note, in addition to Duke's comments, we also have linked in the slide deck a few different articles on the signs that you might be ready to start the business and the signs that you're not, maybe some of the red flags that you need to slow down. So I'm not going to go over that today, but you guys all will receive a copy of the slide deck after this presentation. And if you want to check out the additional resources that we're including in the notes, then you can at that point in time. So moving on to business planning with a purpose. So I don't know about Duke, but a lot of the times when I have people come in and ask me for help with a business plan, they're kind of in one of three different phases. So the earliest stage people are really trying to figure out whether or not their idea is feasible, if it's going to make them money, and to Duke's point, if it's going to make them enough money to risk their current setup of a full-time job and maybe more security. So that's the first stage that we're focusing on in this business plan presentation is feasibility. Is your idea going to make money, and how do you determine that? But then there's a few other phases that we see people proceed to. So if you get through the feasibility business planning and you figure out that your idea is feasible, if it is going to make some money and you feel like there's a good market opportunity for yourself, then usually it's time to make a little bit more of an expansive roadmap. So maybe the industry that you're getting into is something that you're super comfortable with because you've worked as an employee in that industry for a long time, but maybe you don't know about the other aspects of running a business. Maybe you've never gotten your own business license or set up your own business entity or hired people or done your own accounting. And so for any of those things that aren't yet within your skill sets, that's what the business planning's second phase can be about, is creating your roadmap, either figuring out how you're going to handle those tasks yourself, or possibly how you're going to hire people or outsource those tasks so that you can have a holistic business plan that's going to be ready to go once you actually launch it. And then third and finally, the final phase of business planning that I see people in is preparing a deliverable. So a lot of times you've determined that it's feasible, that it's a good idea, you know how to do all the aspects of the business, or you have people that are going to help you do that. But now you need to pitch to somebody. Maybe you need to get a partner, maybe you need to get financing, maybe you need to convince a landlord to lease you a space. And so in those cases, it's less about preparing something and it's more about tailoring what you already have to meet the needs of your audience. And so we see people in all three phases. They have different needs, and so we try to treat them differently and help them with those needs based on what phase they're in. So Duke, anything to add on to the people that you see that are looking to make a business plan? Oh.
I think that was covered very well, thanks. The only other aspect I might add is this is not a linear process. It's almost like a 360 swing around the feasibility. Your feasibility line may not fit going to your right, but if you turned it upside down or right side up or to the left, that very same skill set or that product or that design process or your value proposition may be very well suited for something you didn't think about. So those are things that SBDC advisors will also coach you with.
Great, thanks, Duke. So then moving on to the next slide, we're going to talk briefly about business model canvases. But also I'm going to let Duke talk about the lean canvas as well, because we've got different tools that are meant for different purposes. So if you're unfamiliar with the business model canvas, it's basically like a one-page business planning tool. It was made by a little bit of an academic, so it's maybe a little bit more of a good tool for categorizing businesses than building businesses. But essentially what it's trying to do is to get you to take your business idea and put all of the components of that business up onto one page. So in the very beginning of this tool is your value proposition, which, as we talked about earlier, is the product or services that you're trying to sell, and the complementary features and benefits that that product or service has. And then off to the right, you talk about what customers you have and what sort of relationships you have with them. And then off to the left, you talk about how you support providing that value proposition with key partners, activities, and resources. And then down at the bottom, it's everybody's favorite part. It's the finance part of things, where you've got to figure out, what is it going to cost you to provide the value proposition that you want to sell to people, and how much money you're going to make from the different revenue streams that you're putting out there. Now, as I mentioned, this tool is a little bit more geared towards, documenting existing business models than making new ones. So there's also a different version of this, kind of a derivation called the lean canvas, that can often be better for new businesses, especially ones that have novel ideas. Duke, do you want to talk a little bit about the lean canvas and how it can be used?
Oh, thanks for your consideration there. I can ask a question. Would you rather build a 300-page business plan and not knowing what's ahead of you over the mountain, in the trees, in canyons, or would you rather have a one-page summary of notes that helps you identify how your business is going? So in the early 2000s, the head of the Stanford Entrepreneurship program created a business model canvas to help companies across the board, existing and non-existing, to answer questions simply and then reveal things you didn't realize about your company. Since then, the same person has said in 2013 that the lean canvas, which is very similar, is better geared toward companies that don't have a customer source yet or relationship. And so the difference is, one is looking at your business as if it was running, which is great, especially after it's running. And the other one makes the assumption that your business model is no business model. That a lean startup has no business model starting out. You have some assumptions, it's going to be wrong, and your series or your development process to create a business model is to pivot. That means go in, ask customers what they want, and instead of telling them what they want, and then work your way through until something actually becomes a business model. So those are just two different approaches. One is early stage or not pre-revenue stage or pre-development. The other one fits closer and expands right through the companies that have been around forever. So, take a look at both. You certainly can gain information going both directions. So whichever one you decide to use.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of building off what Duke said, my favorite thing to do is, depending on the type of business, pick the tool that you're going to use for it. So for existing businesses, let's say restaurants or boutiques or CPA firms, businesses that have been long established industries, usually you're going to know who the customers are and kind of how those relationships work. And so you can kind of look towards industry standards and fill out a business model canvas pretty effectively. But if you're designing a software to meet new needs that have never been met before, you're designing a product that doesn't have a customer base, that lean canvas is really the perfect fit for you. So like Duke is saying, take a look at your idea and figure out which one of these is going to be a better fit for you. Because they really can be worthwhile planning tools that are not too burdensome, that can actually be functional as you develop your business idea, whether that be something that's brand new or an existing industry. So before we move on to the next slide, we wanted to do one of our first polls. We wanted to hear what you all are using for your business planning. And so we're going to go ahead and launch the first poll, asking you about what business model tool you're using. And then once we get your results, me and Duke will talk a little bit about where you're all at.
And by the way, it is okay, and large companies are funded very well when their approach to a business is, I'm going to do it just like XYZ company did it, except a little better by doing ABC. That's an acceptable business plan. I should take that back. Business model.
Well, and so it looks like we've got about 80% of the participants having answered. So we'll go ahead and end the poll, share these results. So yeah, so right now it looks like a lot of people are in the it's in my head right now stage and the back of a napkin stage. So that's great because you've got an idea, but then it feels like we're catching a lot of you at the right time, because I would say, in my opinion, it's a good time to transition into a lean canvas or a business model canvas and make sure that you're addressing all of the core building blocks of starting your business. So just like all the other resources, we are going to send out a copy of this business plan. We'll also, a copy of this presentation. We'll also send out a lean canvas as well as a business model canvas. So if you want to try out those tools, you can. And then finally, if you do want to progress into a full business plan because you need to, maybe you have a party that's asking, a lender or a landlord, we can also provide you with a template of one of those. Just let us know, and maybe we can get you assigned to an advisor at the same time. Duke, any comments on the makeup of the different business planning tools that our attendees are using?
Yes, and the information on how to build these are all over Google. You don't need to spend $75,000 for a degree plan. Just go to Google, learn how to do it. It takes just a little bit, and I guarantee you, I will buy you a coffee if it doesn't come in handy in the future and somebody asks you a question about what's your value proposition or what's your exclusive advantage, and you can answer it clearly, and versus perhaps somebody else that comes in and says, well, I don't even know what you're talking about. You're already going to be heads and shoulders above your contemporary. So please take the time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, this can really help you hone your elevator pitch. And then real quick, just like Duke was saying, both the maker of the business model canvas as well as the lean canvas have videos on how to use their tools. So they're on YouTube, they are free, and they're really good resources. So yeah, don't spend money. Give this a go for the first time, and then, you know, get hooked up with an SBDC advisor if you have questions, because you can get a lot of work done without paying for any overly sophisticated business planning tools. So we'll go ahead and stop sharing the poll, and then we're going to go on to the next thing, which is getting into the meat of feasibility business planning. So the first thing that I like to talk about with new clients after we talk about whether or not they're ready to be a business owner is talking about what problem their business solves, or maybe what need does it address. And the reason that I like this question or this framework is that it makes us empathize with who we're trying to serve and understand what their needs are, rather than just thinking, oh, well, I want to make this product or I want to make this service. So instead of thinking about producing something, you're thinking about matching something up with somebody's needs, which I think makes for a more successful business. So this is usually the first place that I start, and I find that it leads well into the rest of the business planning process. But I'm curious to hear what Duke thinks about the problem statements, and how he likes to start as well.
I think this is a perfect place to start, because this is what your whole business does. It's not about your technology. People that are buying your technology, people that will bank, fund it, whatever, have made more money on a pet rock than they have on cold fusion. So they don't care about your product. They only care about other aspects that make your business successful. And is there a demand for it? Does it solve a problem? For example, we had a review the other day that it was a high tech molecular level detection for explosives, and that $100 device that took 10 minutes to change out on a scanner was to replace a half-cent swab cloth that you currently use. So if you look at what problem does your business solve, also ask what problem does your business create. And if it costs you, 1,000 times more and it takes 15 minutes longer, you haven't solved anything. So we might want to think about a pivot.
Well,
But the
yeah,
technology is cool.
well, I love that context too, and we'll talk about this a little bit later. But yeah, like who are your competitors and who are your substitutes is huge, right? Because like Duke just brought to light, if you're trying to replace a solution that's half a cent, that's like 10,000 times cheaper than you are, then who's going to buy your new high-tech solution that solves the same problem? So that's all to say, basically, empathize with your customer. Are they going to care about what you're trying to put out there? And if not, then it might be the right time to pivot and come talk with SBDC advisor. So after we talk about what problem does your business solve, what I like to go into next is who are your customers? So if you wrote your problem statement right, then it should naturally lead into who your customers are, because you're empathizing with your customers, you're empathizing with their needs. And so ideally, if you know what need you're solving, you know who you're solving it for. So a few things on knowing who your customers are and why that's important. So first of all, if you know your customers well, you're going to know their needs well, which is going to help you to tailor your product or service to meet those needs. If you know who your customers are, you might actually be able to estimate your market opportunity. So you can maybe quantify how much money you can make in a year, in 5 years, and especially compare that against the number of competitors that you think are currently in the space. If you know who your customers are, then you're going to be able to market more effectively to them, because you'll know what sort of communication channels they use, what sort of social media they use, how do they typically shop for the product or service that you're trying to sell to them. And then lastly, you're going to be able to determine what channels to communicate to them through and to sell them through, because you're going to know that a little bit better. So the other thing that we want to talk about is what should you know about your customers? So depending on your industry and your product, this might vary a little bit. But in general, the stuff that I like to hit are, one, I'm going to beat this like a dead horse, but what are their needs or problems that you're solving? That's going to be your main focus. Two, a lot of people like to research the demographics of their target market. So sometimes it can be useful to know what the average age, income, education level, geography is of your customers. Three, above and beyond demographics, sometimes it's useful to know psychographics and personality characteristics. So when we say psychographics and personality characteristics, that can include stuff like, why does your customer buy your product? Do they buy it as a gift? Do they buy it for themselves? At what point in time do they buy it? What are their personalities? What sort of lifestyles do they have? Do they participate in sports? Do they have certain interests? And so those are the psychographic and personality characteristics that we'll sometimes want to get into. And then lastly, what we want to talk about is a little bit about how do you learn about them. So a lot of times, somebody will come in and I'll say, well, the first thing that you should do is learn about your customers. I mean, well, how am I going to do that? So my first approach to learning about your customers is just to kind of do a brain dump in how you perceive them. So a lot of people that we work with will already be from an industry that they want to start their business in. So they'll have a rough idea of who they want to sell to. And so you might just want to write up a customer profile yourself based upon your experience. And then after you write up your first best guess about who your customers are, it's often good to try and reconcile that with existing market research. So the sources that we like to use are stuff like association groups. So a lot of the times there'll be a large association for your industry if it's an established industry. And those associations will have market research reports and industry reports, and you can kind of compare what your perception of your customer is to the industry at large's perception of that customer. Another good source to tap, if you're comfortable with it, is actually to talk to competitors or owners of comparable businesses. So this can often be difficult because competitors are not usually going to want to talk to you, but for some cases, if you're opening a business that's going to be super regional, so it's going to be just in Nevada, or if it's going to be just in Reno, Sparks, or Las Vegas, sometimes you can look to neighboring regions and find businesses that are not going to see you as competition and talk to those business owners. And I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but usually if you go into it extremely transparently and you're not going to be a competitor to their geography, you can actually get a lot of you can actually kind of life hack the business planning process by talking to somebody that's been through this process before. And then the last way to learn about your customers is actually just to talk to them. So this is the most time intensive, to actually go out either in person or to try to virtually survey your customers, but it can be the most worthwhile. It's usually the most daunting because it's hard to figure out where to do that. But again, it's the best firsthand market research that you can pull together. So I've been talking way too long, and I'd like to throw it to Duke and hear about how he's researched his customers in the past and what notes he has on defining his customer and how that's helped him to grow his businesses.
Well, what Jake just presented is an MBA in a can. So consider that slide and the discussion that Jake has presented to be a mandatory course for anybody starting to get in business, including your friends and family. If you have partners, have them attend Jake's session here. That's why I recommend it to all the clients. It really is a comprehensive thing that you may not have considered. One additional thing we might want to discuss is something called an MVP. It's not a sports most valuable product. It's a product, it's something called the minimally viable product, MVP. You should know that word, those 3 letters, because when you're starting a company, you don't have to go from A to Z and come out with a very shiny product or service brochure ready to go. In your process of developing your company and your business model or your idea, whether it's a product or service, you could have a big cardboard. Say you're gonna build a vending machine that creates hot food right there on the spot, and nothing else existed like that. You can have a cardboard box with a slot for money, and you demonstrate it. You put in the money. The person inside the box takes the money, puts a hot bowl of soup in front of you, and you grab the bowl. That is an MVP. And you can demonstrate that and get customer feedback just on that and how you need to improve it. Hey, we want it so that it comes out separately and you pour it in separate things because we may be in the car for the next 5 minutes. Or those types of input from customers gives you the ability to change an MVP. You can imagine if you sunk in 2 years and $200,000 to convert a vending machine into something that nobody wants. That's the value of a pivot and feedback loop. The other thing is, I was going to bring up who, what, why, and how. Make sure that you, again, have a very clear understanding of who your customer is. Let's say, for instance, you have a cleaning service for an airport, and you know your vacuum cleaner or your service of the product mix you have can clean the airport 20 times better than the nearest competitor or the current supplier. And in your mind, from your perspective, you're saying that your customers want this. The customer are the passengers that walk through that terminal are my customers. And that would be wrong. The customer would be the purchasing agent who's been there for 18 years, has 2 more years before retirement, and you're asking them to change the sourcing of the products that, if they're right, no big deal. They don't get any rewards, they don't get a promotion, they don't get bonuses. If they get it wrong, they could get fired and they could lose 18 years of service and start their career all over again. So who's really your customer? And does that customer really care if your product costs 10 cents less per gallon than their current system? Because they may be so busy that they don't care if they pay $2 more per gallon, as long as they don't have to change what they're already doing. So you got to really dig deep to find your customer, and then you can address it. And then what you're doing is creating a value statement, going back to several slides, to determine, are we providing not just a value and a value statement, but an exclusive value statement nobody else can provide? And then the final step, that nobody can say no, all the way up the chain. Because in that decision process, whether it's a service, product, or concept, 99% of the people will be able to say no, and only 1% will be able to say yes. And the people that have the ability to say no are very eager to use that power. So you want to phrase it, context it, put it in a box that it's easier to say, well, I can't say no, than to say no. And then it gets passed up to the decision maker, who again, you adapt it, pivot, and say to the point where they can't say no because it's their responsibility to say yes through a mechanism and leverage of knowledge is responsibility. Otherwise, the default is this is how everybody else in the industry is doing it. I'm not taking any chances on my career. So that's my 2 cents worth.
So real quick, I'm going to launch one more of our poll questions where we're going to ask you about how you're currently conducting your market research. Basically, we're wondering, if you've talked to customers or if you're trying to figure out who your customers are you doing so by talking with them one-on-one? Are you sending out surveys through the internet? Are you talking with competitors or role model businesses to learn about your customers? Or are you just estimating who you think your customers are based upon your past experience? And then real quick, while everybody's taking that poll, one thing that I wanted to reiterate is, after you go through all this process of figuring out who your customers are, you might have to rinse and repeat. And what I mean by that is if you have multiple products, if you have multiple services, you're not always going to have just one target market. Even for one product, you might have multiple customer segments that it would appeal to. And so if you have multiple customer groups, you should be going through the process of researching each of them, understanding what their needs are, understanding how large they are, and understanding how you sell to them. Because that's what's going to help you to prioritize your products and services, and it's going to help you prioritize what customers you actually pursue first and who are the lowest hanging fruit. So it looks like we've got pretty good participation on this poll now, so we'll go ahead and end it and share it with everybody. Duke, what are your thoughts on where everybody's at in learning about their customers?
I think it's pretty representative of most people.
Yeah, it's really encouraging. I mean, I've seen about half of everybody is doing one-on-one interviews, which is amazing. And then a lot of people are actually talking to competitors as well. So that's really encouraging.
Yeah, as long as the people that are answering one-on-one don't mean one person.
Right. Hopefully it's, 20 plus people and you're getting outside of your friend and family group, because ideally you want to be talking to strangers that are a good fit for your product or service. All right, so we're going to move on to competitors. So after you figure out what your value proposition is and you figure out who the people are that you're serving, it's often really helpful to figure out who your competitors are to see how much of a market opportunity you have and how many people you're competing against for it. So when we talk about competitors, there's a number of reasons that it's important to understand who they are and what they do. So first, you want to know who your competitors are so that you understand how you measure up. So what are their strengths and weaknesses, and what are you bringing to the table? And like Duke said, are you providing a product or service in a different way than anybody else out there? What differentiates your product or service and makes it undeniable that they have to get it through you? Two, it's important to know your competitors so that you can build your pricing strategy. So a lot of the times, if you know what your competitors are and you know how they're pricing their products, you can figure out, one, if you should be pricing yourself at about the same or a discount or a premium. And then two, there's actually different pricing strategies that you could use, right? So you're selling by product. Are you selling a subscription service? What is it that you're trying to sell, and how are your competitors doing it currently, and what sort of success are they having? Three, it's important to know your competitors to understand who their customers are. So maybe they're serving a particular niche of people that you don't want to go after, and by pivoting your business a little bit, you're not even going to have to directly compete with them. So by knowing your competitors, you can actually position yourself so you have to compete for the same people less, and maybe make things a little bit easier on yourself. And then four, it's important to understand your competitors, because a lot of times you can dissect their marketing strategy by observing what they do. So obviously you can't get in their boardroom, you can't get behind closed doors, but most oftentimes your competitors will have an online and physical presence. So you can go to their stores, either physically or digitally. You can see how they're advertising themselves through Google, through social media pages, through their website, and reverse engineer a lot of what they're doing just by listing off those competitors and observing what they're doing and figuring out how you want to do things yourself. So for those reasons, those 4 reasons, it's really important to, make a list of your top competitors and figuring out how they're doing things. Now, when you're looking at competitors, you'll probably see a few different types. So number one, you'll see people that are direct competitors. They're competing for exactly the same customers that you are, maybe with a slightly different product or solution. You'll see a range of indirect competitors, maybe people that have something a little bit tangential to what you're offering. And then lastly, you might see stuff like substitutes. So to give you an example, I guess I go to gyms a lot. So with gyms, there's a number of ways that you can get your exercise, right? You could start a new gym that's just a gym with workout equipment and cardio equipment, and it serves the need of keeping people healthy. But you could also start a sports league, and you could also sell equipment that could be used to do workouts at home. So there's a variety of different competition that you can think about when you're starting, especially a new business. And it's important to see that spectrum of competition so you can figure out where you measure up and what customers aren't being served by the existing spectrum of competition. And then lastly, the one thing that I like to talk about in terms of types of competition is role model competitors. So early on, I said that it can be useful to research your customers by talking with your competitors. So sometimes if you can find a role model competitor or a role model business in a different geography than you can, kind of life hack creating your business plan by figuring out how are they positioning themselves in the marketplace, at least publicly. What sort of physical store do they have? What sort of online presence do they have? And are those things that you want to learn from and possibly mold to meet your needs? So those are the 4 types of competition that I look for when I'm helping people with a competitive analysis. Usually I try to at least have the top 4 to 6 competitors that are direct competitors and maybe 1 role model competitor as well. And then lastly, I just want to talk briefly about what should you know about your competitors. So the very basics are, what are the product or service offerings that they have? What is their pricing strategy and how does that compare to what you want to implement? Who are their competitors, or sorry, who are their customers? And then what is their customer feedback like? So a lot of the times with businesses these days, you can find customer feedback online. You can find out a lot about your competitors' strengths and weaknesses just by taking a look at their Google reviews, their Yelp reviews, if it's relevant, taking a look and seeing what their online reputation looks like. So a lot of this can be pulled together in a competitive analysis template. If you're interested, we're linking one in the slide deck that we're going to send out to all of you. And then if you want a little bit more hands-on assistance, you can always reach out to Duke, myself, or a business advisor to get a little bit more hands-on help in doing competitive analysis. Now, circling back around, Duke, what is your strategy when you do a competitor analysis, and where do you like to start, and where do you go from there?
That was a good coverage, by the way. Circling back to the question why, my counter question from the entrepreneur side is why not? Because your competitors have already built the gondola and the tram all the way up to the top of their mountain, whether it's your mountain or not. Going up that tram and studying it on the way up and the view from where they are already teaches you a lot you don't have to do. It saves you resources to what you can do, and they may have taken 5 years to build it. You may create a whole new solution that bypasses their shortcomings. So it gives you perspective and several models to look at. When you look at competition, it doesn't have to be your enemy. I mean, competitors are no longer just enemies. And the reason why is because indirect competitors can be your complementary competitors. Meaning if you sell relish, you might think another food service company like a hot dog company is your competitor. The answer is, well, they may be, but they're indirect, but they're complementary, meaning that they go along with it. The more hot dogs they sell, the more relish you sell. You might as well add some mustard to go with it. There's also substitute competitors that don't have to be enemies, that you can actually cooperate with. If you're a substitute, like for shoes, and Reno has both winter and summer, and you sell shoes and you're going up against a ski boot company or a ski shop, why not, if they're not covering that model, work with them to cooperate with summer shoes if that's what you provide. Likewise with anything, open air convertibles or motorcycles compared to four-wheel drive snow going vehicles. The opportunity to cooperate leverages your service or product into a 1 + 1 = 3. And then if you can both come up with a strategy, you just created an invisible one more that it could actually end up equaling 4. On the role model side, again, that can be complementary. Somebody that's in your industry can end up being your strategic partner, your strategic investor. You can provide something of value to them and they to you, and you can end up being the best of partners. So when we talk about the definition of competitors, they can also be your best allies. That's it.
Thanks, Duke. So moving on from competitors, we're going to talk briefly about industry. So far we've talked about what is your problem statement, which is kind of similar to your value proposition. We've talked about the customers that your value proposition serves. We've talked about the competitors that you're either competing with or possibly partnering up with, as Duke has said, in good circumstances. And so to put all that into context, a lot of times we like to identify what your industry is. Now, a lot of the people that Duke deal with, sometimes you're in an industry that's being defined. And so it's kind of ill-defined who exactly it is that you are competing against and what trends make up that industry. But sometimes if you're in a long established industry, there's a lot of information on what the best practices are, who your competitors are, and what your customers look like. And so it's always a good idea to circle around and see if you can figure out what industry you fit into. And a really common classification system that we use and a lot of government organizations use is the North American Industry Classification System. And then another one is called the Standard Industrial Classification System. So these are just two industry classification systems that, like I said, a lot of government agencies use, and subsequently market and industry research agencies have also started to use these. And so if you're looking for intel, on your industry in the form of a market research report or an industry research report or an article, it's often useful to figure out what your industry is in terms of NAICS code, and maybe what are the keywords to search for your industry in. And if you have those things in mind, a lot of the times you can pull up sometimes free market research reports, or if there are paid ones, you can find those as well. And then instead of going out and trying to talk to half of the world about your industry, you can get a lot of the best practices and the trends and the current events distilled for you into an industry report that's often prepared by either an industry research company or possibly an association for your industry. So I don't want to dive too deeply into industries in general, but this is just a good life hack. If you're trying to figure out who are your customers or who are your customers in general in this industry and what are the best practices, if you can figure out what your industry is and use that to Google around, you can find a lot of useful information. And then in addition to that, we at the University of Nevada, Reno, so at the SBDC, we operate out of both UNR as well as UNLV. And on both campuses, we have public libraries that have access to databases. And so if there are databases that you can get these market or industry reports through, we're always more than happy to help you use your NAICS code or your SIC code to pull recent relevant market and industry research reports that can help you beef up your business plan and just in general understand what you're getting into better. Duke, do you have any tips, any best practices when it comes to doing industry research for either Main Street or for new businesses?
No, it's well covered. Only thing I would add maybe is suggest that you consider additional areas you have not thought of. If there's something that you do as a product, service, or even technology, there may be a chance if you look through enough and use your imagination with an open mind, you come up with something you haven't even thought of and the others haven't thought of.
Yeah, and that's a great point because, you won't always fit squarely into one industry. Sometimes you'll straddle multiple. So if you have opportunities to expand into other ones, definitely look into those other industries for other opportunities. So we've talked about all of the fun stuff, and now we get into the stuff that that's kind of right in my wheelhouse, which is the finance and the costs. So usually once you're done determining whether or not your idea is feasible from like a customer product fit standpoint, making sure that there are people out there that want to buy what you're selling, you need to figure out what it's going to cost you to provide that and whether or not it's going to be profitable. So the place that I like to start with people is what are your startup costs, and then what are your monthly operating expenses. So usually if I can get people to kind of work off of some general startup cost lists and some general monthly expenses lists, what you can put together is an estimated budget for how much it's going to cost you to start up and have some cash, and then how much it's going to cost you to break even each month. And I think that's a really useful kind of thought experiment to run, because oftentimes the people that we're working with are coming from industries that they have experience with. So if you can put your break even in terms of dollars that you have to earn or number of customers that you have to serve, you can pull from your prior experience and think about whether or not that's realistic. Or if you've done your market research really well, you can compare what your break-even revenue is to how much market opportunity there is and see whether or not you have a feasible idea or not. Now, I'm vastly oversimplifying this process. It does take time for you to chase down what your startup costs are going to be and what your monthly expenses are going to be. But to me, this part of the process is really important, right? Because if you don't know what it's going to cost you to sell your product, you don't know whether or not this is going to be a profitable idea. So this is a really, this is an extreme simplification of this process. We do have a list of general startup costs and operating expenses that we're going to send you with this slide deck. I also have a spreadsheet that you can use for planning purposes. But for now, I don't want to dive too much deeper, just because it usually gets kind of industry specific if you go any deeper than this. Duke, any thoughts on what you should do when you're first trying to cost out how much it's going to take to run your business?
Thanks. First, let me cover a default. Most people think that there's only two sources of capital to start your business, to buy your business, and that is banks and investors. A lot of people say, I want to go to a bank because that's easy money, or I don't want to go to investors because I don't want to become a slave to my investors. Both of them couldn't be further from the truth. Banks are not easy. It's only easy for the right group. Keeping in mind that if you're pre-revenue or the business does not exist, that's not a good place for banks. You can check out, there's a banking score SBDC webinar coming up this Saturday, and Elisa can give you a heads up on that. And basically, you need to know that banks are a perfect fit for a perfect client. Outside of that, they want to be nice because they're good people, but you're kind of trying to use a can opener as a hammer. It's just not going to work well. Same thing with investors. Investment groups and firms are not the place to go for most people, except for a specific position in timing and phase of your business. So since you have to accept that startups or business purchases or growth come in all shapes and sizes, financing should too. And there are many, many ways that you can skin that cat, so to speak. Bad example of words, but there are many ways to approach that solution. And bottom line is you need capital to grow. We've done that a lot through strategic planning, and that's what we do as consultants, is to come up with solutions for your needs when certain things don't fit and not force fit them. So it's easier, like we'll find a mountain that has a spool of rope on top, and all you do is push it and it rolls out because everybody's working the same way. Now you get a rope from the top to the bottom, and your whole company can just climb that rope or walk up that rope instead of trying to push a rope from the bottom all the way to the top. Just does not work. And the other thing is the approach of reverse planning. Why are you getting into business? If it's because you love changing tires and you want to do that 10 hours a day for the rest of your life until you're 95 and you're in your deathbed and your company will die when you die or retire, that's fine. But that's how most people design their business to start with. When in fact, you ought to be doing reverse planning. What is your goal? Is your goal to be able to when you get to a point, not be able to have to work in that business or let it run by itself and generate 50,000, 100,000 a year. If that's the case, then we backwards plan it to find out how much you're going to need to sustain it. Say $50,000, generally the formula is about $1 million. You're going to have to generate $1 million. And so you're going to structure it. Well, you can also, if you want to get to 100,000 a year for the rest of your life, you have to get to $2 million. How can you do that? You only have certain dimensions. You can do it for twice as long. You can do it twice as good, or you can just be twice as smart. And you can take your business as you're building it and generating the first million in order to be able to retire in 50,000, and then create your business in a model that can sell for $1 million. And there you go. You jump at point one, at your 1 million point, and you've already gone to your 2 because you were smart enough to design it that way. And those are definitions such as, do not create a customer base that's dependent on you. Don't ever say that the customer, I have a customer base because they like me. I manage and I know how this company works. That's why it's so good. Those are all poison pills and cancer for your evaluation of your company. You want to build a systemic company that operates by itself so that you can be gone for 2, 3, 4 months. Nobody will notice. That's what you want as a company, because that's what's valuable to the next buyer. They don't have to depend on you being gone and losing all the customers. You don't have more than 15% focused in one customer, that if that customer goes bankrupt, you do too. You don't want to be under that big rock when it falls. So those are the kinds of things we talk about reverse planning, so that you can retire when you retire from that company, or multiply or scale. Because one of the other options is that $1 million company can become worth 5 or 10, because somebody sees that as an opportunity to take what you've done as a system, not as yourself, but now can repeat it 100 times over. Now your company is worth very much more. So those are the kinds of strategies we work with to try to get you where you want to be when you want to be there.
Yeah, and perfect segue into our next slide, Duke. So as Duke was talking about, once we do estimate our costs and our monthly, our startup costs, our monthly costs, and our revenue, usually you're at the point where you know how much money you need to finance the business. And like what Duke was saying, banks are not a perfect fit for a lot of people, especially startups. So being that I've done a lot of commercial real estate lending and a lot of lending, helping people borrow through the SBDC, what I've seen is that if you want to get startup financing from a bank, a lot of the times you need to be positioned well. And what that usually means is that you want to have a lot of industry experience in whatever industry you're trying to start your business in, that ideally you have a spouse that has another source of income, or you have another source of income that can support you for the first couple of years while you start the business. And then ideally that you have some sort of, at least 10 to 20% of the cash that you need to put into the business, you have yourself. And if you don't meet those criteria, then a lot of the times banks might not be a great fit for your startup. So if you're not in that position, then the other things that you could look at are either maybe scaling down your idea so you can start it as a side hustle and kind of prove the validity of your idea before you approach banks or investors. Or sometimes people will turn to friends and family, which can be uncomfortable for some people, but if you're confident in your idea and your market opportunity, then it should be a way to help your friends and family become more wealthy themselves. So that's the really tough part about startup financing. Like Duke said, banks are not always a good fit for people, and oftentimes they're not, just if you have a good idea. And so if you're unsure of whether or not you are a good fit, that's a good time to come and talk with us, because we know, having dealt with investors and banks, what their lending criteria is and what they're looking for out of your loan application. So if you're uncertain about if your business idea and if your financial situations will meet their needs, that's a perfect time to reach out to us so that we can assign an advisor over to you. And then if you do think that you're a good fit for something else, whether that's angel investors or alternative sources or financing through the lotto, we're happy to talk with you about any of those other sources as well. And I'd highly recommend reaching out to us to do so, because like I said, whether it's Duke or myself or other advisors, we have a lot of experience to pull from in approaching different sources, right? So if you're looking to approach an investor and it's not something I have a wealth of experience in, but Duke does know that, then we might pair you up with Duke. Or if you're looking to buy commercial real estate, you have an existing business, that might be a perfect fit for me. And so whatever the scenario is that you're trying to finance, I highly recommend coming in and talking with us, because one, it's free. And then two, a lot of the times we know what the other side is looking for in terms of business plan and in terms of your financial standing. So I won't dive into this too much more, just because it's highly situation specific, and it won't do anybody any good to talk about stuff that's not relevant to them. But we are at the end of the presentation. So if you do have specific questions that you want to be answered publicly, then you can go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we're going to stop recording, but we will talk about the questions that you have amongst the whole group. So keep in mind that if you have anything that's proprietary or sensitive, don't put those in the chat. Reach out to us so that we can assign you a business advisor. But if there's anything that you want us to talk about publicly, we're happy to do that right now. And then just imagine that next to my picture is Duke, because that's our co-presenter today, is Duke Nishimura. We just haven't had his picture up there yet.